Hey guys, tonight we set foot in a land where the horizon never seems to end. A place where dunes roll like frozen waves and wind carries the voices of forgotten empires. You walk into the silence of northwestern China, where centuries ago the Tangut Xi Xia dynasty rose from dry sand and stubborn will. Your sandals crunch over pebbles. The air is dry enough to make your lips crack, and somewhere in the distance you swear you hear the groan of a camel's bell. Don't worry. You probably won't survive this desert trek if you forgot water. But that's half the fun of bedtime history, right? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you want, drop your location and the time where you are. I always love seeing the wide map of where everyone is listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You move across this frontier where China's cultivated heartlands fade into rugged badlands. Imagine yourself walking where the Loess cliffs crumble, and beyond them, an ocean of desert waits. The Tangut people once lived here, calling it home long before they thought of crowns or capitals. They herded animals across wind-swept plateaus, grew millet where soil allowed, and guarded trade routes with the sharp eyes of survivors. A widely accepted fact. The Tangut people were a Tibeto-Burman ethnic group, culturally distinct from both the Han Chinese and the nomadic Turks of the north. That uniqueness gave them both pride and problems. Your boots kick up dust, and a dust devil spins like a cranky spirit across the plain. The Tanguts thrived in this harsh borderland precisely because they adapted where others faltered. Picture yurts with smoke trailing up, hardy ponies tied nearby, and a pot of sour milk simmering just enough to wrinkle your nose. Sure, not everyone's bedtime fantasy involves sour dairy, but history doesn't care about your modern taste buds. A curiosity. Some sources suggest Tangut chiefs claimed descent from a legendary white horse, a myth that gave them divine right to rule. Was it true? No one can say, but it made for good storytelling around campfires. You walk on, passing dry riverbeds that once swelled when storms rolled in from the Tibetan plateau. This shifting land was both a blessing and a curse. To the south lay the Song Dynasty, rich and cultured, but suspicious of frontier people. To the north spread the open steppe, the playground of raiders. And here you stand, at a crossroads where survival demands toughness, wit, and just a little luck. The wind whistles, and you duck your head under your scarf. Sand finds its way into everything, your shoes, your hair, even your dinner. You think to yourself, how could anyone build a kingdom here? Yet that is exactly what the Tanguts dared to do. The Tangut homeland stretched across what is now Ningxia and Gansu, regions still marked by desert and mountain. Farmers worked the edges of rivers, while traders carried silk, salt, and horses through its valleys. And you, as the traveler of tonight's dream, feel the tension between stillness and motion. One moment the land looks empty, the next it swarms with caravans or marching men. Historians still argue whether the Tanguts were primarily pastoral nomads who later adopted farming, or settled farmers who picked up nomadic habits to survive borderland pressures. You shrug at the debate and sip from your water skin. Either way, it worked. The twilight deepens, and you notice campfires flickering like scattered stars across the desert floor. The Tanguts gathered in clans, each with its own elders, horses, and grudges. Politics often boiled down to who could ride faster and shout louder at tribal councils. Imagine that as your workplace meeting, everyone armed, half of them mounted, and nobody bringing donuts. A fact anchors you. Before becoming Xi Xia, the Tanguts called themselves the Minia, one of many groups under the umbrella of Tangut identity. They lived in scattered settlements, shifting with the seasons and rivalries. You pause at the foot of a rugged cliff. On its surface, faint carvings hint at Buddhist prayers, scratched centuries ago by passing monks. Religion wandered here too, following traders and pilgrims. By the time you touch the cool stone, you sense how this harsh frontier was less empty wilderness and more a cultural mixing pot, half desert, half destiny. A stray camel wanders past, looking unimpressed with your presence. You almost trip over its tether and laugh at yourself. Yes, you're trying to look like a serious historical traveler, but in truth, even the livestock has more desert swagger than you. The night sky spreads wide, and the air chills. You hear distant drumming, maybe a ritual, maybe just neighbors trying to keep awake. You feel the weight of the land pressing on you, yet also its possibility. This is where stories begin, and one story in particular, the story of the Tangut Xi Xia dynasty, will soon demand your full attention. But for now, you keep walking through the desert night, waiting for the moment when these scattered clans decide they are something greater than the sum of their tents, horses, and myths. You keep walking through the cooling desert night, and by dawn the first rays stretch long shadows over the plateau. Ahead, a camp bristles with banners, each cloth painted with animal symbols, wolves, eagles, and horses. You're stepping into the moment when the Tangut clans, once a collection of restless groups, start knitting themselves into a single power that no dynasty in China could brush aside. A widely accepted fact. By the 10th century, the Tanguts, still calling themselves Minia, were already under the sway of the mighty Tang dynasty and later the Song. Yet they were never passive subjects. You watch them trade loyalty for favors, then snatch back independence when emperors blinked. Flexibility was their secret weapon. In this vision, you're part of a council meeting under a wide leather tent. Elders argue, warriors pace, and tea steams in bowls that are definitely more grit than glamour. You lean in to hear. They talk about taxes demanded by the Song court, raids from Turkic tribes, and the constant pressure of survival. Out of this frustration, a consensus begins. One clan must lead. The leader emerging is the Tuoba clan, with sharp-minded chiefs who can out-negotiate emperors and outride rivals. You see their sons wrestling in the sand, training for the future like little desert gladiators. And yes, one of them cheats by tossing sand in his brother's face. No referee whistles here. A curiosity. Some records claim Tangut leaders staged elaborate horse races where the victor automatically gained political authority for the season. Imagine running your modern government that way. Congratulations, Senator. You ran fastest, so now you control the tax code. Efficient, if chaotic. The Tuoba family pushes harder. Through careful alliances, they gain recognition from the Song court as border guardians. You walk with their envoys along rough tracks, watching them deliver tribute, horses, furs, and hardy camels. In return, they receive silk, coins, and the oh-so-precious acknowledgement that they are more than just desert raiders. The sun climbs higher, and you notice how wealth starts to shift this world. Silk curtains flap in tents, Monks chant in makeshift shrines, and artisans hammer out bronze ornaments that gleam like desert fire. What was once a ragged clan identity is now swelling into a proto-state. Historians still argue whether the Tangut rise was primarily due to their military genius or to their skill in balancing diplomacy with their Chinese and steppe neighbors. You scratch your chin, amused. Why not both? Survival here demanded every trick available. By the 11th century, the Minya begin calling themselves Tangut, and with that new name comes a sharper sense of destiny. You follow caravans to their stronghold at Xiazu, a frontier town swelling with activity. Markets spill with felt, jade, tea, and horses. And at night, when the stars blaze like lanterns, storytellers recite lineage myths that place the Tanguts alongside the great houses of China. A fact to ground you. Tangut chiefs like Li Deming consolidated land and authority, paving the way for his son, Li Yuanhao, to seize the imperial dream. You picture Deming as the cautious architect, building foundations stone by stone, while Yuanhao will soon play the gambler. You sit cross-legged at a fire, where warriors swap tales. One man claims he once rode so fast across the desert that his horse caught fire from friction. Another laughs, snorting tea through his nose. You realize quickly that frontier humor is as dry as the land itself. As days pass, you see something shift. The scattered camps are fewer, while fortified towns rise in their place. Walls of stamped earth, watchtowers, and granaries appear, stitched into the landscape. It's no longer about survival alone. It's about permanence. The Tanguts are no longer guests of the desert. They are landlords. Curiosity lingers in your mind. Some scholars suggest Tangut women held unusually strong roles in clan affairs, often managing wealth or religious foundations. Was it truly a frontier feminism, or just necessity in a land where every hand mattered? The question floats unanswered as you watch women chant prayers in temples, while also balancing ledgers. At the edge of camp, you see a boy practicing archery, his bow nearly his own height. He looses an arrow that wobbles pitifully, landing nowhere near the target. His friends laugh, and you chuckle with them. Someday, one of these children will command armies, but right now they're mostly shooting at dirt. The Minya clan's story is gathering speed, like a horse tightening into full gallop. Tribute missions grow more elaborate, and neighbors start to take note. By the time the Song Emperor grants them formal recognition as rulers of their territory, you know what's coming. The Tanguts are no longer content to be border wardens. They are rehearsing for empire. The desert wind rises again, carrying with it the smell of horse sweat and incense. You sense it in your bones. These people will not remain in the shadows much longer. You walk with them toward a horizon that holds crowns, wars, and glory, not just for chiefs, but for an emperor waiting in the wings. The horizon blurs in the heat as you walk with the Tanguts into a new century. The air tastes of ambition, sharp and metallic, like the clang of freshly forged weapons. Li Yuanhao, son of Li Deming, now steps forward with the confidence of someone who knows his time has arrived. You sense the weight of the desert shift around him. A fact sets the scene. In 1038, Li Yuanhao declared himself emperor, founding the Western Xia dynasty, which Chinese chroniclers later called Xi Xia. This was no casual promotion. By taking the imperial title, Yuanhao directly challenged the Song dynasty's claim to universal authority. You imagine the Song Emperor's face when he heard the news, probably the historical equivalent of a slow, offended gasp. You walk behind Yuan Hao's retinue as he rides a black stallion across the plateau. Banners snap overhead, bright with Tangut symbols. Warriors cheer, monks scatter blessings, and peasants bow low in the dust. It is a moment as theatrical as it is political. Yuan Hao crowns himself not as a subordinate, but as equal to the great dynasties of his time. Curiosity sparks. Some accounts claim Yuan Hao shaved his head and forced his subjects to do the same, leaving only a patch of hair at the temples. Was this to mark Tangut identity, or just his personal style choice? Historians still argue whether it was a genuine cultural decree or an emperor's eccentric vanity project. Either way, you picture entire barber shops working overtime. You stroll into Yinchuan, his chosen capital, nestled against the Helan Mountains. Streets are dusty but bustling, temples rise with fresh paint, and soldiers drill in courtyards. You notice Yuan Hao's reforms spreading quickly. Military organization sharpens, tax systems become more efficient, and an official bureaucracy starts to hum like a carefully tuned instrument. The air feels charged, as if every stone is part of a larger design. At a council hall, you hear heated discussion. Advisors warn that proclaiming an empire will provoke the Song. Yuan Hao shrugs, his eyes glittering with defiance. He points to the mountains. "We are shielded. We are strong. Let them come." You sip your tea quietly, half admiring his bravado, half thinking you'd rather not be standing next to him when arrows start flying. The mainstream fact continues. Yuan Hao created one of the most formidable cavalry forces in East Asia. His horsemen were famed for their speed, discipline, and ability to strike deep into enemy territory. Imagine watching thousands of riders thunder across the steppe, dust trailing like a storm front. You'd probably dive behind the nearest cactus for cover, but not everything was strategy and blood. In quieter hours, Yuan Hao patronized religion and culture. Buddhist monasteries received support, and scholars worked to refine the new Tangut script, a written system with thousands of characters designed to preserve their language. You watch a scribe hunched over parchment, muttering complaints about how complex the characters are. Some modern linguists still groan when studying it, like grad students staring down a coffee-stained thesis draft. A quirky tidbit. One Tangut legend claimed Yuan Hao's horse could understand human speech and responded with nods or neighs at the right moment. A useful advisor, unless the horse was just asking for snacks. You step into a training ground where archers practice mounted shooting. One rider looses an arrow that neatly splits a target. Another misses entirely and nearly hits a food stall. The merchant curses, the rider blushes, and you hide your smile. Even in an empire's prime, someone's always bad at their job. Yet beneath the laughter lies tension. Yuan Hao's ambition is a gamble. You sense the Song dynasty's irritation growing like storm clouds. Envoys come and go, treaties signed and broken, borderlands flare with skirmishes. You realize that crowning himself emperor was not just theater. It was a declaration of independence that no neighbor could ignore. Historians still argue whether Yuan Hao's reign was driven more by genuine cultural pride or raw hunger for power. As you walk past his palace gates, watching guards in lacquered armor, you wonder if those two motives were ever separate at all. Pride and power often drink from the same cup. The sun sets over Yinchuan, bathing the walls in red light. You hear a chant echoing from a monastery, deep and resonant, as if blessing this fragile empire. Yuan Hao's gamble has paid off, for now. The Tanguts are no longer a people on the margins. They are a dynasty, stamped into history with all the ceremony of drums, banners, and a bold emperor on horseback. The desert wind cools your face, and you keep walking, sensing that the crown just placed on Yuan Hao's head carries both triumph and looming trouble. Empires rise with ceremony, but they survive only through endurance, and the desert is never kind to the proud. The night passes, and by dawn you find yourself inside the beating heart of Xi Xia, wandering through the streets of Yinchuan, where daily life unfolds in rhythm. The crowning moment of Li Yuanhao is already fading into routine, and you realize that no empire survives on banners alone. It thrives on how people eat, pray, trade, and laugh when no emperor is watching. A fact guides you. The Tangut realm was home to both nomadic herders and settled farmers, making it a society balanced between horse and plow. You see it in motion. Flocks of sheep driven through city gates, sacks of millet carried on shoulders, and camels swaying under the weight of imported tea. This hybrid economy gave Xi Xia both resilience and diversity, a blend of the steppe and the sown. You stroll into a morning market, where merchants haggle over bolts of silk, brick tea, and salt cakes. A Tangut woman in a bright headscarf sells lacquered bowls beside a Han potter offering glazed ceramics. A Tibetan monk wanders past, chanting softly, while a Turkic trader boasts loudly about his horses. You can smell sesame oil frying flatbreads, hear laughter from children chasing each other with sticks, and feel the press of cultures colliding in a single dusty square. Curiosity flickers. Some sources say Tangut society had unusual legal codes. One law required that if a thief stole something, both he and his family might be punished. Was it harsh frontier justice, or simply a way to keep everyone honest? Historians still argue whether such laws were exaggerated by Chinese chroniclers or truly enforced. Either way, you tuck your purse deeper under your robe, just in case. You walk on and enter a Buddhist monastery. The air hums with incense, golden statues gleam in dim halls, and monks bend over scrolls. Tangut emperors patronized Buddhism heavily, but ordinary villagers seemed equally devoted. You join a group lighting butter lamps, the flames wavering like desert stars. Nearby, young novices yawn through their chanting, proof that even spiritual life can't always cure teenage boredom. A quirky tidbit makes you smile. Tangut nobles reportedly loved elaborate feasts with roasted meats, flavored wines, and music played on long-necked lutes. One court account suggests guests competed in drinking games until they toppled under the table. Imagine explaining that to your modern HR department. Yes, it's team building. Your Majesty just passed out, perfectly normal. Stepping outside, you pass a school where scribes teach children the intricacies of the Tangut script. Rows of characters cover the board, looking like miniature mazes. One boy groans, his brush strokes sliding into chaos, and the teacher raps the desk in frustration. You sympathize. Learning Tangut script probably felt like cramming for a calculus exam with sand in your eyes. Still, education mattered. Bureaucrats trained here would later administer taxes, enforce laws, and record dynastic glories. You can almost hear the shuffle of parchment as clerks tally grain, livestock, and tribute. It is bureaucracy, yes, but it is also the quiet machinery that sustains empire. The city itself breathes around you. Houses of rammed earth cluster along narrow lanes, while wealthier quarters boast courtyards shaded by willows. Water channels flow from the Yellow River into fields of wheat and rice, a lifeline carved from the desert. Farmers guide oxen through furrows, their songs rising in rhythm with the plow. You notice how religion and trade mix easily here. A Muslim merchant sets up his rug beside a Buddhist shrine. Taoist talismans hang from a doorway across the street from a Tibetan prayer flag. Faith is everywhere, yet no single voice drowns the others. You sense tolerance born not of kindness, but necessity. When survival is fragile, you don't pick fights over whose incense smells holiest. Historians still argue whether Tangut society leaned more toward nomadic values or whether farming and bureaucracy fully reshaped them into a sedentary kingdom. As you walk past shepherds sharpening spears and scribes copying sutras, the blend feels seamless. Perhaps the question itself misses the point. The Tanguts thrived precisely because they were both. Children run by, dragging wooden toys shaped like horses. A dog barks and chases after them. A soldier yawns at the gate, helmet tipped back as if history can wait until he's finished napping. You laugh softly, realizing that despite emperors and wars, most lives are built from moments like these: bread baking, ink drying, and kids making too much noise. Evening falls, and lanterns flicker along the streets. Musicians pluck strings in tea houses, while storytellers weave tales of ancestors and battles. You sip a warm drink, its flavor somewhere between sweet and bitter, and let the noise wash over you. This is life in Xi Xia. Not just emperors on horseback, but markets, prayers, and jokes shared over cheap wine. The dynasty breathes through its people, and tonight you share their air, their laughter, and their silence under the desert stars. The lanterns fade into dawn as you find yourself standing before a wooden desk where a scholar dips his brush into ink. Tonight's journey shifts from noisy streets to quiet chambers, where the Tangut identity takes shape not with swords or crowns, but with strokes of a pen. You lean in close, watching as the script of a lost tongue unfolds beneath his hand. A fact frames the moment. Li Yuanhao ordered the creation of a unique Tangut script around 1036, consisting of tens of thousands of characters, as complex and daunting as Chinese writing, but designed specifically to record the Tangut language. It was not borrowed, it was invented, a deliberate act to set Xi Xia apart. You see rows of dense, angular characters forming like miniature fortresses across the page. You sit on the mat beside the scribe. His brush moves carefully, each mark heavy with meaning. He mutters under his breath, swearing at stubborn ink. Across the table, another clerk scratches the wrong line, then panics, smearing his sleeve to hide the mistake. You smile. It seems some student anxieties are eternal. Curiosity tickles your mind. The script was so massive that it included over 6,000 characters, with subtle variations for different words. Was it meant to be practical, or more a statement of cultural pride? Historians still argue whether the script was designed for efficiency or sheer spectacle. You can imagine an exhausted scholar whispering, "Why couldn't we just use emojis?" The Tangut rulers poured energy into schools to teach this system. You walk past classrooms where children repeat characters aloud, voices rising like chants. Teachers pace with rods in hand, correcting posture, urging discipline. For them, learning script was more than literacy. It was loyalty, proof that they belonged to an empire distinct from Song China or steppe tribes. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some manuscripts included not only religious sutras, but also Tangut dictionaries and phrasebooks. One surviving text even taught how to insult someone politely. You picture two Tangut scholars exchanging barbed remarks in flawless calligraphy, bowing stiffly while trying not to laugh. The script's importance goes beyond language. By creating their own system, the Tanguts planted their flag in the realm of culture, saying, "We are not imitators, we are ourselves." You watch monks copy Buddhist sutras into Tangut, ensuring that sacred texts reach the ears of people in their own tongue. The smell of burning butter lamps mixes with the dry scratch of brush on paper. In one corner, artisans carve characters into stone steles, chiseling them deep so wind and rain cannot erase them. You run your fingers across grooves still sharp centuries later. The script feels like a stubborn voice refusing to fade, each mark an echo of pride. Historians still debate whether Tangut script was widely used by ordinary people or remained mostly an elite project. The evidence is mixed. Common folk probably relied on oral tradition, while officials and monks filled archives with heavy tomes. As you step into a storeroom stacked with scrolls, you wonder how many voices have been locked away inside, silent until rediscovered. You exit into a courtyard where wind stirs loose pages left drying on racks. They flutter like restless birds, some tumbling into the dust. A young novice chases after them, tripping and landing face first in sand. His friends laugh, and you do too, realizing that empires may rise and fall, but clumsy apprentices remain universal. The sheer complexity of the script eventually becomes a weakness. Imagine officials trying to train endless clerks, each required to memorize thousands of characters before they could even calculate taxes. Yet at the same time, the beauty of the system is undeniable. Pages glow with careful artistry, brushstrokes forming patterns almost like woven cloth. As night settles again, you hear chanting from the monastery. Sutras in Tangut script echo into the dark, each syllable heavy with centuries of devotion. You look up at the stars, wondering how many other languages, once carefully inked, have already vanished into silence. The Tanguts built their empire not only with cavalry and walls, but with words. Tonight you hold those words in your hand, fragile as paper, strong as memory. You step from the script-filled halls into the cool night air, where temple bells toll faintly across Yinchuan. The rhythm of Tangut life is not written only in ink, but also carved into rituals of faith beneath the desert sky. As you wander, you catch the scent of incense, yak butter, and candle wax drifting from temples, mingling into a perfume that is equal parts earthy and divine. A grounding fact: Buddhism became the dominant faith in Xi Xia, supported heavily by emperors and aristocrats, though Taoism and native animist traditions also held sway. You hear sutras chanted in Tangut script, prayers rising like dust motes in golden shafts of sunlight through high temple windows. You push open a heavy wooden gate and step into a monastery courtyard. Monks in maroon robes circle slowly, turning prayer wheels, while novices sweep leaves into neat piles. A lama lectures in a voice like gravel, explaining sutras copied just days ago. One boy nods along, clearly pretending to understand, while another hides a half-eaten dumpling in his sleeve. You can't help but smirk. Enlightenment is tough on an empty stomach. Curiosity lingers. Some records suggest Tangut emperors adopted elaborate Buddhist rituals that even outdid their Chinese or Tibetan counterparts. Pilgrimages, massive scripture printing projects, and lavish temple endowments consumed enormous resources. Historians still argue whether this devotion was pure piety or a political move to legitimize their rule. You stand watching an altar piled with offerings and wonder if the line was ever clear. You walk further, and faith shifts its costume. In a quieter neighborhood, Taoist priests burn talismans and whisper charms against desert spirits. A farmer bows, asking for protection for his crops. Down another lane, a shamanic ritual unfolds. Drums beat, smoke rises, and villagers chant in rhythms older than dynasties. The mix is dizzying, yet somehow natural here on the frontier. A quirky tidbit. One Tangut emperor supposedly built a 7-story wooden pagoda so tall it swayed dangerously in the wind. Locals joked that climbing to the top was the quickest way to achieve nirvana, by falling off. By midday, you're following pilgrims along a dusty track toward the Helen Mountains. The trail winds past shrines carved into cliffsides. Images of Buddhas, bodhisattvas, and fierce guardians stare down at you, painted in reds and golds that somehow survived the centuries. You pause before one weathered figure whose serene smile makes you feel, for a fleeting second, like the desert itself has forgiven all its harshness. Monastic life hums with both discipline and humanity. Inside a refectory, you hear the scrape of wooden bowls as monks eat porridge in silence. But step outside again, and you catch novices giggling over a cricket fight in a clay jar. You lean over to watch the tiny warriors clash, realizing even the most sacred places still leave room for small earthly joys. The faiths intertwine with politics. You overhear whispers of emperors consulting oracles before campaigns, or sending gold to Tibetan monasteries to secure spiritual backing. In a desert where survival is precarious, the divine becomes a constant negotiating partner. Historians still argue whether Buddhism in Xi Xia was primarily Mahayana, Vajrayana, or some blended frontier version. Whatever the case, you hear it in the chants, feel it in the stupas, and see it in the frescoes that glow like embers, even in fading light. The day ends with a festival. Lanterns bob along streets, drums roll, and dancers whirl in colorful robes. At the heart of the square stands a towering butter sculpture. Yes, butter, shaped like a lotus, glowing softly in the lamplight. The air smells equal parts delicious and absurd. You laugh quietly, imagining the panic of one unlucky monk tasked with keeping it from melting. As the festival winds down, the desert sky turns velvet black. Candles flicker, prayers fade, and silence stretches across the land. You feel the faith of the Tanguts pressing around you, not a single creed, but a chorus of voices, each lifting their song to the vast, indifferent stars. Lantern smoke thins into morning haze as you leave the festival square and follow the creak of leather and the soft thud of padded hooves. A caravan strings across the flats like a stitched seam, camels nodding as if they've heard every joke the desert can tell and are still unimpressed. You fall in beside a trader whose beard is a filing system for breadcrumbs. He grins, offers you tea that tastes like a warm, salty hug, and waves you into the line. The road unfurls west, then north, threading valleys that the wind keeps rewriting. A widely accepted fact steadies your stride. Xi Xia controlled key stretches of the Hexi corridor, the essential Silk Road funnel between China's heartland and Central Asia, and levied taxes on caravans that passed through. You feel that power in small ways: paper permits tucked into sleeves, seals pressed in wax, way stations where clerks count bales with the solemnity of astronomers. At one post, a Tangut official stamps your pass so hard you think he's trying to print the moon on it. Administration, but make it dramatic. The road is a river of rumors. From the east, you hear about song silks in colors that make peacocks jealous. From the west come spices that turn lunch into a geography lesson. Bales of tea ride high, porcelain clinks in straw, and bundles of musk and incense give the air a polite halo that almost cancels the camel perfume. Almost. A boy runs ahead, ringing a bell to warn stragglers off the track. He takes his job very seriously, and his bell even more so. You reach an oasis town where walls of rammed earth glow like warm bread. Market alleys swallow you into a pinball game of shouting prices and clattering scales. A woman from Liangzhou slaps a bolt of damask. A Sogdian jeweler squints through a lens the size of a lentil, and a Tangut scribe hovers nearby to translate, mediate, and occasionally negotiate the price of a translator. You buy a fig that tastes like a small sunset, and then immediately buy 3 more because self-control is overrated in the fruit department. The empire's grip shows in its relay system. Couriers swap horses at stations where troughs are brimming and haystacks wear neat topknots. A messenger hurtles in, flings himself out of the saddle, and is halfway onto the next mount before his shadow catches up. Whether the network is a perfected frontier version or a patchwork of older Chinese models, historians still argue whether Xi Xia standardized these relays under a single state bureau or coordinated them through local garrisons and guilds. You just know the tea at every station tastes exactly like boiled determination. At noon, the caravan skirts low hills studded with beacon towers. Smoke once rose from these when danger prowled. Thin gray sentences written to the horizon, grammar of alarm. A watchman naps under the stairs with a bow across his knees, which you decide is either supreme confidence or terrible scheduling. A breeze rattles prayer flags tied to the parapet, and you catch yourself reading the sky like a timetable. If clouds arrive by dusk, the dunes will sing. Curiosity nudges you as you climb a ridge of sand that hums faintly underfoot. Travelers have long spoken of singing dunes near oasis basins, slopes that boom like distant drums when the grains slip together. Is it myth? You shuffle down the lee, and the hill purrs with low thunder, like a giant cat clearing its throat. Your face does the delighted, "Did that just happen?" shape. The camels remain unimpressed because camels are famously hard to book for encore performances. At a fortified toll gate, your train compresses into a patient knot. Guards tap crate lids, scribes ask pointed questions, and a clerk eyeballs your purse like it insulted his mother. The tariff list, copied in Tangut script and Chinese characters, is posted on a board: tea, silk, salt, musk, paper, copper, and horses. Another fact slips in while you wait. Tea for horse exchanges were a frontier constant, with Xi Xia leveraging its position between song markets and steppe demand to profit from both animal and leaf. A wrangler leads out a mare that looks like she could outrace gossip and greets you with the world's most judgmental snort. The day stretches, heat tuning the air until even shadows feel tired. You pass fields coaxed from the desert by careful channels, farmers guiding water with the tenderness of a potter's hand. Wheat nods, mulberry leaves flicker. Somewhere a child practices the Tangut alphabet in dust, frowning at strokes that refuse to behave. A monk in travel robes buys ink at a stall and reminds the shopkeeper that merit is measurable in properly priced stationery. The shopkeeper agrees spiritually and then raises the price. A quirky tidbit rides beside you. Merchants swear that out beyond the Aegean River stands a black city whose gates drink light, a place where papers rustle at night, as if librarians never learned the meaning of closing time. Later ages call the ruins Karakoto, a Western Xia outpost swallowed by sand. Is it haunted or just windy architecture with great acoustics? The story survives because traders are excellent at two things: moving goods and upgrading ghost tales. Evening brings the caravanserai's square yard, a box of calm where the world sets itself down. The keeper's ledger is thicker than his patience. Fee paid, you walk your camel in, which is to say your camel drags you at a respectful speed while pretending you do not exist. In the corner, a storyteller balances on a stool and retells the day's news with extra adjectives. Children gasp. An old man corrects him loudly because the romance of commerce requires precise footnotes. Someone passes a bowl of noodles with a dangling chili that looks like a punctuation mark, and you discover that spice has a very clear opinion about your sinuses. Coins clink on mats, cast round, square-holed, familiar to fingers from Chang'an to Samarkand. Xi Xia mints circulate in the mix, many modeled on Chinese styles, proof that money speaks multiple dialects if it buys dinner. A trader counts in Tangut, bargains in Chinese, and whispers a blessing in Tibetan when the math lands in his favor. Cultural borders behave like sand drawings here, crisp at noon, smudged by night. Under a roof of beams blackened by 1,000 meals, you unlatch your pack. The day's dust falls out in a small dune, which you sweep into a neat pile because you are tidy, even when composed of 40% grit. Laughter fades to murmurs, then to snores, a chorus of travelers practicing the art of being horizontal. In the courtyard, a guard walks his rounds, counting sleeping camels like woolly stars. As you close your eyes, you feel how Xi Xia moves, less like a wall, more like a hinge, swinging open for goods and closing again for tolls. The empire is both host and hall monitor, a broker in a world where every object carries a story, and every story pays a fee. Historians still argue whether the Tangut state leaned on rigid monopolies or allowed semi-private caravans to flex under local compacts. The ledger survives, but the tone of voice does not. The road hums either way. Night settles. Wind fingers the eaves. Somewhere beyond the last watchfire, dunes tune themselves for a low song, and the caravan dreams of headings, waits, and distant gates that always open if you arrive with the right stamp and a little luck. The caravan fades behind you, its bells dissolving into the hum of dunes, and your feet now carry you to the southern frontier. Dust clings to your cloak, but it is not trade dust tonight. It is the grit of border patrols, the restless ground between Xi Xia and the Song Dynasty. Here, peace is a rumor, and skirmish is the language everyone speaks fluently. A fact strikes first. The Western Xia fought repeated wars with the Northern Song throughout the 11th century, pushing for recognition and territory, and often winning concessions despite being the smaller state. You see the evidence in the nervous eyes of farmers working fields under watchtowers, in the clang of hammers shaping armor, and in the dry air buzzing with tension like a string tuned too tight. You follow a squad of Tangut horsemen patrolling the border. Their bows rest across their backs, quivers heavy with arrows fletched in hawk feathers. The riders grin at each other, cracking jokes about who will trip over his stirrup first. One man insists his horse can smell a song scout a mile away. You lean in closer to the horse. It sneezes on your sleeve. Not exactly intelligence work, but effective in its own way. Curiosity brushes your thoughts. Some chronicles suggest that Tangut raiding parties once carried off entire herds of song oxen, returning home so proud that feasts were held in honor of their bovine victories. Historians still argue whether such raids were strategic operations or glorified grocery runs. Either way, cows paid the price of empire. The land itself feels divided. On one side, the ordered song provinces with irrigated fields and market towns. On the other, Tangut territory, where walls of rammed earth rise suddenly from desert flats, each post bristling with soldiers whose lives are measured in seasons of watch duty. At dusk, you hear drums from a song outpost across the plain. Echo answers from the Tangut tower near you, as if both sides are locked in a percussion contest. One soldier smirks. They can beat their drums all night, but ours are louder. You imagine the neighbors on both sides wishing everyone would just invest in quieter hobbies. The mainstream fact continues. The Tanguts forced the song to sign treaties, often receiving silk, silver, and tea in exchange for halting raids. This tribute system frustrated song officials, but reflected frontier pragmatism, cheaper to pay than to bleed. You picture song couriers riding north with bolts of silk stacked so high they probably blocked their peripheral vision. In a camp, you sit by a fire, where warriors roast strips of mutton. The meat sizzles, fat popping into flames. One soldier claims his arrow once pierced 3 targets in a row. Another coughs, muttering, 3 targets made of bread, maybe. The group erupts in laughter. Even on tense borders, humor sharpens survival like a whetstone. You stroll further and see a training yard where Tangut cavalry practice wheeling maneuvers. Horses thunder in arcs, arrows streak into the dusk, and commanders shout orders that echo like whip cracks. The ground trembles under hooves, and you realize this is why the song paid tribute, because facing a charge like this in open battle is the stuff of generals' nightmares. Historians still argue whether the song genuinely feared Tangut military superiority or simply chose pragmatism to focus resources on fighting the Khitan Liao in the northeast. You watch sparks fly as soldiers repair armor and decide that fear and pragmatism often ride the same horse. A quirky tidbit drifts into memory. It's said some Tangut soldiers braided their horses' manes with small bells so that charges sounded like storms accompanied by jingling music. Imagine the terror and the absurdity of an enemy army that arrives like both thunder and a traveling ice cream cart. As night deepens, the camp grows quieter. Soldiers wrap themselves in blankets, staring up at the stars. You lie down beside them, hearing the faint murmur of guards exchanging passwords on the walls. The silence is not peace. It is only a pause, fragile as paper. Across the plain, song watchfires flicker. Between them lies no man's land, a strip of ground where arrows occasionally fly and treaties are as temporary as morning frost. The Tanguts have carved themselves an empire here, but every heartbeat reminds you it is an empire balanced on a knife's edge. The desert wind rattles your cloak, and you understand the rhythm of Xi Xia's life on the frontier. Trade by day, skirmish by dusk, negotiations by dawn. A cycle as endless as the sand. You roll onto your side, staring at the wavering glow of distant fires, knowing this uneasy dance with the song will shape the Tanguts for generations. The border fires dim behind you, and now the wind carries a darker drumbeat. The ground trembles faintly, not with caravans or cavalry drills, but with something heavier, an approaching storm of hooves from the north. You lift your eyes across the steppe horizon and feel it. The Mongols are testing Xi Xia's strength. A fact steadies the scene. By the early 13th century, the Mongol Confederation under Genghis Khan began campaigns against Western Xia, using raids to probe its defenses before launching full-scale assaults. You sense this in the anxious glances of Tangut patrols and the hurried repairs of watchtowers along the northern frontier. You climb a dune and spot them. Riders in loose formation, bows strung, arrows gleaming like restless stars. They circle settlements at the edge of Tangut land, darting in to seize livestock, then vanishing before a counterattack can form. Villagers scramble to herd animals behind stockades. The air feels charged, like the pause before a lightning strike. Curiosity pricks your ear. Some chronicles claim that when Mongol envoys first approached Xi Xia, Tangut commanders scoffed, believing their fortress walls and desert barriers made them invincible. Historians still argue whether this arrogance was real or exaggerated later to explain their downfall. You suspect truth hides somewhere between pride and hindsight. You walk along fortress walls of stamped earth. The ramparts stretch across ridges, punctuated with beacon towers. Soldiers pace nervously, scanning the horizon. One fiddles with his helmet strap until it snaps. He curses softly, and his comrade laughs. The Mongols will run when they see your hair. Humor, brittle but brave, keeps fear at bay. A quirky tidbit echoes here. Travelers noted that Mongol raiders sometimes sang during attacks, voices rising in eerie harmony over the sound of arrows. Imagine facing a cavalry charge, accompanied by what sounds like an impromptu concert. Terrifying, but at least on key. You join a Tangut war council. Maps of sand and pebbles spread on the ground, generals pointing with sticks. They argue over whether to hold the line at the Yellow River or retreat deeper into the mountains. One officer insists the Mongols are only a nuisance. Another growls that nuisances grow teeth. You sip your tea quietly, deciding you prefer the opinion of the growler. The mainstream fact unfolds further. Xi Xia endured multiple Mongol invasions, sometimes negotiating peace through tribute, sometimes resisting fiercely. Genghis Khan himself reportedly suffered a serious wound during one campaign against the Tanguts. You imagine the whisper of that story rippling through Tangut camps, hope flickering like a fragile flame. If even the great Khan can bleed, maybe the desert can defend itself. At dusk, you ride with a Tangut patrol across the dunes. Shadows lengthen, horses snort, and the silence presses hard. Suddenly, arrows streak out of the gloom. Mongol scouts scatter after a quick volley, laughing as they vanish. The Tangut captain curses, shouting that shadows fight dirtier than men. You duck instinctively, heart pounding, realizing that no wall can fully stop raiders who vanish into night. Historians still argue whether Xi Xia might have survived longer had it allied more closely with the Song or the Jin against the Mongols. Instead, isolation and fractured diplomacy left it vulnerable. From where you stand, watching smoke rise from a distant village, the answer feels both obvious and unchangeable. The night closes in. Watchfires flicker along the fortresses, and distant hooves echo across the desert floor. You taste dust in your teeth and feel the weight of history pressing forward. The Mongol storm has not yet broken in full, but already its wind rattles every gate and whispers doom through every crack in Xi Xia's walls. The desert feels tighter now, as if even the wind has learned to ride. You walk beneath the shadow of gathering storm clouds. Only these clouds carry hooves, bows, and the relentless will of Genghis Khan. The testing raids are over. Now the thunder comes in full. A fact clears the dust. In 1209, Genghis Khan launched a large-scale invasion of Western Xia, demanding submission. The Tangut Emperor resisted at first, relying on fortified cities and natural barriers, but soon realized the Mongol war machine was unlike any neighbor before. You see this in the panic of messengers galloping from fortress to fortress, scrolls tied to their belts like desperate prayers. You climb the walls of a Tangut city. Below, Mongol cavalry moves like black water, pouring across the plain in waves. They circle, cut supply lines, and send flights of arrows that whistle into courtyards. Soldiers beside you notch bows, their hands shaking. One jokes, "At least if they miss, we can collect free arrows." His friend chuckles too loudly, the kind of laugh you recognize as fear wearing a mask. Curiosity rattles in your mind. Some accounts claim the Tanguts attempted to summon supernatural aid, consulting astrologers and performing grand rituals to call heavenly armies. Did they truly believe the stars would fight for them, or was it theater to soothe a frightened populace? Historians still argue whether these stories reflect actual practices or later legend. You glance upward at the indifferent night sky and imagine stars rolling their eyes. The Mongols press harder. Their siege tactics are ruthless and inventive, battering rams, ladders, even captured engineers from China and Central Asia, forced to build siege engines. You watch towers tremble as stones crash against them, defenders scattering like startled birds. The Tanguts fight back with crossbows, boiling water, and sheer stubbornness, but the walls groan under each assault. A quirky tidbit. One chronicle claims Mongol troops once used flaming camels, driving them toward Tangut fortifications to terrify defenders and break gates. You can't decide if that's genius, cruelty, or simply proof that history sometimes reads like a very dark comedy sketch. Either way, the poor camels deserved better. Inside the city, food grows scarce. You follow families as they ration millet, children chewing husks like candy. Monks chant in temples, their voices trembling but steady, as if prayers alone might hold the walls upright. Outside, the Mongols keep circling, patient as wolves. The mainstream fact continues. Western Xia eventually surrendered in 1209, agreeing to give tribute and military support to Genghis Khan. Yet submission never lasted. The Tanguts rebelled repeatedly, each time drawing the Khan's fury back upon them. Tonight, though, you walk through the moment when the first great siege bends an empire's pride. A council meets in the emperor's hall. Advisors argue bitterly, fight to the last or negotiate. One pounds his fist. The walls still stand. Another whispers, Walls don't grow grain. At last the emperor bows his head, ready to send envoys with silk and silver. You hear the sigh ripple across the court, a mix of relief and shame. Historians still argue whether Western Xia could have survived by fully allying with the Mongols instead of resisting, or if submission was always temporary under such a conqueror. From your perch in the crumbling gatehouse, you suspect no alliance could have lasted long. Genghis Khan's hunger stretched far beyond these deserts. The siege ends in uneasy peace. Tribute flows, but resentment festers. Tangut soldiers patch walls, peasants sow fields again, and traders creep back onto the roads. Yet the empire is changed. You walk the streets at dawn and see it in every tired face, the sense that shadows now ride over their shoulders, shadows that can return at any moment. The dust of retreat lingers in the air, but you know this is not the end. The Mongols will return, each time heavier, until resistance finally breaks. For now, though, Xi Xia breathes in ragged survival, still alive, still proud, but forever haunted by the storm crouching just beyond the horizon. The uneasy peace frays quickly, and soon you are standing again on the walls of Yinchuan, the Tangut capital pressed hard against the Helen Mountains. The city glows under lantern light, but the glow feels brittle, like paper lanterns in a storm. Word spreads. The Mongols are back, this time not for tribute or testing, but for final reckoning. A fact to anchor you. By 1226, after years of Tangut resistance and broken agreements, Genghis Khan launched a full-scale campaign to destroy Western Xia, targeting its cities with overwhelming force. You feel it in the ground, trembling with the advance of tens of thousands of riders. You walk the streets at dawn. Bakers still pull flatbreads from ovens, monks chant in monasteries, merchants haggle in stalls. But underneath, every glance is edged with dread. Children kick a leather ball near the gate, pretending not to notice the smoke rising in the distance. One boy trips and laughs, then looks up too long at the horizon, his laughter fading. The Mongols close in, their banners black against the sky. They surround Yinchuan, cutting water channels, blocking supply lines, and letting hunger gnaw louder than drums. Inside the walls, tension thickens. Some soldiers sharpen spears obsessively, others stare blankly, already halfway to surrender. One grumbles, "If the Khan wants my dinner, he can come cook it himself." His friends laugh, brittle but real, a joke against despair. Curiosity drifts. One legend claims Genghis Khan, injured during the campaign, vowed to erase the Tanguts in revenge before his death. Historians still argue whether this was genuine oath or later myth to explain why Xi Xia was obliterated so thoroughly. You glance at the walls, wondering if vengeance truly drove the hammer, or if conquest alone was enough. The siege grows brutal. Mongols hurl stones, batter gates, and drive terrified prisoners before them to sap the defenders' will. Inside, famine bites deep. You follow a family sharing one cracked bowl of porridge, each spoonful thinner than the last. The air in temples is thick with incense and whispered prayers, as if smoke itself could become a shield. A quirky tidbit lightens the gloom for a moment. One chronicle says Tangut defenders once rolled flaming carts downhill into Mongol lines, scattering horses and men alike. Imagine that. Defense by runaway bonfire. The chronicler notes dryly that it worked only once before the Mongols learned to step aside. Even desperation comes with a learning curve. You climb the wall again. From here you see the yellow river glittering faintly, a ribbon just out of reach, useless to the thirsty. Siege engines creak in the Mongol camps. Arrows rain down in whistling arcs. You duck, landing hard on stone, breath ragged. Around you, defenders mutter curses that sound more like prayers. The mainstream fact presses closer. In 1227, Yinchuan fell. The city and the dynasty were crushed under Mongol siege. The final emperor perished, whether by surrender, execution, or illness. Accounts differ. What remains certain is that the walls that once guarded Xi Xia collapsed under fire and hunger. Historians still argue whether the Tanguts' repeated defiance sealed their fate or if destruction was inevitable under Mongol expansion. Watching smoke rise from shattered gates, you think perhaps both are true. Empires may choose their manner of falling, but not always the fact of it. As night descends, Yinchuan flickers with fires set by attackers and defenders alike. Shadows dart through alleys, screams muffled by dust. You step carefully over fallen banners, once bright Tangut symbols, now torn and trampled. The city is breaking, and the dynasty that dared call itself equal to China's emperors is breaking with it. You turn toward the palace. Within, trembling courtiers argue, even as the walls shake. Should they flee, negotiate, or simply surrender to fate? Outside, Mongol horns wail like hunting beasts. Inside, silence spreads like smoke. The capital is falling, and you stand in the midst of its last heartbeat. The ashes cool beneath your feet, but whispers remain. You walk through the emptiness where Xi Xia once stood and realize the dynasty is not gone. It lingers in fragments of art, ruins, and memory. The Tanguts themselves may have been scattered, absorbed, or silenced, yet echoes of their world still hum in the desert wind. A fact to ground you. Even after the destruction of 1227, traces of Tangut culture persisted in manuscripts, Buddhist art, and ruins like Karakoto, rediscovered centuries later by explorers such as Pyotr Kozlov in the early 20th century. These finds reopen the voices of a dynasty thought forgotten. You step into a ruined temple where faded murals cling to cracked walls. Bodhisattvas gaze serenely, despite chipped paint and crumbling plaster. A guide points at the pigments, reds made from cinnabar, blues from crushed lapis carried across mountains. The colors, though dulled, still glow faintly in the half-light. You feel as though the Tanguts themselves are whispering through the brushstrokes. Curiosity sparks. Some scholars suggest Tangut artistic style influenced Tibetan and Chinese Buddhist art, blending frontier creativity with classical forms. But was it influence, or simply shared faith carried by trade and migration? Historians still argue whether Xi Xia's art shaped its neighbors or simply mirrored them. You tilt your head at a mural of a fierce guardian with wide, cartoonish eyes. Maybe the Tanguts had a sense of humor after all. A quirky tidbit brightens the gloom. Explorers at Karakoto once found entire libraries of Tangut books hidden behind walls, supposedly sealed up to protect them from invading Mongols. One tale claims that when Kozlov unearthed the cache, his camel accidentally trampled several priceless scrolls. Imagine explaining that to a museum curator. Yes, we lost a chunk of history, but the camel was very sorry. You walk further, past carved steles where Tangut script runs like a frozen river of ink. Fingers trace the grooves, puzzled, enchanted, frustrated. Modern linguists squint at dictionaries, trying to crack the code of a language long silent. Each deciphered character feels like striking flint and seeing sparks. The mainstream fact continues. Tangut script was eventually deciphered in the 20th century using surviving bilingual texts, unlocking an entire lost literature of sutras, contracts, and official documents. Suddenly, a people thought vanished spoke again through their words. You wander into a desert valley where ruined fortresses squat against the sand. A shepherd leads goats along the crumbling walls, their bleats echoing against ancient stones. Children chase each other through gaps where gates once stood. Life continues, weaving itself into ruins as if to remind you that memory and present are never far apart. In the distance, the Helen Mountains brood, their ridges streaked with snow. At their feet lie petroglyphs, deer, hunters, and shamanic symbols carved into rock long before Xi Xia. The Tanguts added their prayers beside these older marks, layering history like paint on canvas. You kneel, touching both carvings, and feel centuries stacked beneath your palm. Historians still argue whether Xi Xia left a lasting legacy in governance, culture, or language, or whether it dissolved too completely under Mongol conquest. But walking here, you sense that absence itself is a form of presence. To vanish so completely is to leave a mystery, and mysteries draw memory like moths to flame. As night falls, you return to Karakoto's silent ruins. The walls loom black against the stars, their gates yawning like open mouths. Wind whispers through the gaps, carrying voices you cannot fully understand. Yet you hear them, echoes of a people who refused to be only dust. You lie down beneath a broken arch, stars spilling overhead. The Tangut Empire may be gone, but its fragments endure. In art, in language, in ruins that still command awe. Memory is stubborn, and the desert keeps every whisper, waiting for ears willing to listen. The ruins sigh around you as if trying to answer questions left unanswered. You walk through scattered stones and fragments of script, realizing that the Tanguts did not vanish cleanly. They dissolved into riddles. To this day, scholars still wrestle with the puzzle of Xi Xia. A fact leads the way. Although much of Tangut history was erased by Mongol conquest, modern research through archaeology, manuscripts, and linguistic analysis has pieced together significant knowledge. Yet unlike the Song, Liao, or Jin, Western Xia remains one of China's least understood dynasties. You feel that uncertainty pressing on you like desert sand, soft but heavy. You stop at a cracked stele carved with Tangut script. Linguists manage to translate parts thanks to bilingual texts found in Dunhuang and Karakoto, but gaps remain. Some characters refuse to give up their meaning, sitting stubborn as camels on strike. Scholars frown at them for decades. The characters stare back, unimpressed. Curiosity deepens. Did Xi Xia collapse solely because of Mongol might, or were internal fractures, famine, dissent, overextension, already weakening its bones? Historians still argue whether the dynasty's end was inevitable or accelerated by choices made too late. You run your hand along a wall where cracks spider outward, wondering if empires crumble from outside blows or from inside strains. A quirky tidbit makes you grin. Some explorers in the early 1900s believed Tangut ruins were haunted by singing spirits, only to realize the eerie noises came from sand shifting in hollow towers. Imagine the disappointment. No ghosts, just geology auditioning for the choir. You wander into a museum hall centuries later in this dreamlike walk, where Tangut sutras rest under glass, their ink still sharp. A school group passes by, one boy yawning, another sketching doodles in his notebook. You chuckle. History is always grand to some and boring to others, even when it's written in the ashes of a lost empire. The mainstream fact threads deeper. Western Xia served as a cultural hinge between China, Tibet, and Central Asia. Its location along the Silk Road meant it absorbed, adapted, and transmitted ideas, religion, art, military practices. Without it, the flow of Buddhism into China might have looked very different. You sit among scholars debating late into the night. Some argue the Tanguts left no lasting mark. Others insist their innovations in script and governance echo faintly in Chinese frontier administration. Their voices rise like rival monks chanting in different keys. The question of Xi Xia's true legacy remains unsettled. A knot history keeps worrying at without untying. Historians still argue whether the dynasty deserves to be ranked alongside the Liao, Jin, and Song as one of the major medieval powers, or if its brief survival and sudden erasure place it in the footnotes. Standing in the desert ruins, you know it was both. A giant in its moment, a shadow afterward. The desert wind moans through Karakoto's hollow gates, raising dust like restless ghosts. You feel the questions hanging in the air. How much of Xi Xia is forgotten forever? How much still sleeps in hidden caches of manuscripts? And how much is simply waiting for someone to ask the right question? As you walk, the mystery itself becomes the legacy. The Tanguts live now not in armies or palaces, but in debates, in ruins that refuse to close their mouths, and in the stubborn persistence of scholars trying to coax words from silence. The puzzle of Xi Xia is not solved tonight, but maybe that's the point. Mystery is a form of survival, too. The desert is quiet now, softer than it has ever been. You walk one last time, through the emptiness where Western Xia once stood, the wind brushing faint trails across the sand, as if rewriting history with every gust. The echoes of Tangut voices swirl around you, market calls, monastery chants, the thunder of cavalry, all fading into whispers. The empire is gone, yet its story lingers in the air, in ruins, in fragments of script, in the curiosity of those who still ask about it. A fact to ground this final step. Western Xia's existence lasted less than 2 centuries, from its founding in 1038 by Li Yuanhao to its destruction in 1227 by Genghis Khan. In that short span, it created a script, shaped a culture, commanded armies, and left marks on the Silk Road that endured long after the dynasty itself vanished. You stand beneath the broken gate of Karakoto. The city lies hollow, walls dark against a desert moon, yet inside, silence hums, like a memory too stubborn to fade. In the dust at your feet, you trace the curve of a Tangut character, one of thousands invented to preserve a people's voice. It is clumsy, imperfect, but still there. A quirky tidbit reaches you. Modern computer scientists have even built fonts for Tangut script, digitizing the strokes once painstakingly copied by monks. Imagine explaining that to Li Yuanhao, his empire gone, but his alphabet living on in Unicode. You chuckle softly. Eternity sometimes hides in pixels. Curiosity lingers with you. Will future excavations unearth more of Xi Xia's hidden texts, temples, or artifacts? Historians still argue whether the greatest treasures of Tangut culture lie undiscovered beneath desert dunes. You imagine manuscripts slumbering under sand, waiting like seeds for the right hands to bring them back into light. The desert night thickens. Stars scatter across the sky, unbothered by centuries of change. You feel your steps slowing, your breath easing, as though the story itself is ready to rest. Xi Xia has ended, but in remembering, you've carried its voice across the silence. The journey quiets now, easing into calm. You no longer walk across battlefields or ruins. You drift instead through the hush of night, where the dunes roll like gentle waves under moonlight. The sharp edges of conquest and collapse soften, leaving only the wide embrace of desert silence. Every echo you heard, of traders bargaining, monks chanting, soldiers laughing, fades into stillness, yet none are truly lost. They settle instead like starlight on your skin, reminders that every empire, no matter how mighty, becomes a whisper in time. Your breathing slows as you imagine the Helan Mountains in twilight, their outlines softened into pale silhouettes. In the distance, a lantern flickers, steady, warm, welcoming. It is not a warning fire, not a siege beacon, only a quiet glow against the dark. You walk toward it in your mind, each step lighter than the last, until the weight of walls and wars slips away. The Tanguts have spoken their piece, and now they rest. You can rest too. The sands that swallowed empires also cradle dreams, and tonight they cradle yours. Let the desert wind carry the last fragments of story far from you, until it is only the sound of air moving gently around you, the steady rhythm of breath, and the vast comfort of night. Sleep comes like a caravan after a long road, deliberate, patient, inevitable. Let it arrive, let it settle. The world will wait until morning, and for now there is only peace. The end. Sweet dreams.